recording. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our closing keynote session for our Spring Welcome Week. I hope y'all have enjoyed the programming this week, and if there are any sessions you wanted to attend and were not able to, those recordings will be shared by next week. So this afternoon we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Peter Felton from Elon University. In a minute, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Christy Short to introduce Dr. Felton. But before I do that, I did want to remind you that we do have a giveaway for this session today. We are giving away 5 copies of Dr. Felton's book, Relationship Rich Education. So you do have to stay till the end to be able to win one of these 5 copies. So please hang out until the end of the session. I will go ahead and let you know that we are going into some small breakout groups later on during the presentation. I have informed Dr. Felton that many of us are multitasking today and supporting and assisting students at the same time. So if you happen to have a student contact you either over the phone or online and need to help them while we're in a breakout group, please don't worry about leaving the session. Just mute yourself until you're able to finish helping that student and rejoin us. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Short for our introduction.
Thank you so much, Erin. And before I introduce our esteemed speaker, I just want to express our appreciation to you for all of your work that you've done for Welcome Week. This has been an excellent event, and just wanted to let you know how much we appreciate your efforts. Our speaker today for our keynote session, Learning and Relationships in and Beyond Our Classes, is Dr. Peter Felton, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Engaged Learning, Assistant Provost for Teaching and Learning, and Professor of History at Elon University. He has written 6 books about undergraduate education, including most recently Relationship Rich Education, How Human Connections Drive Success in College. He served as the president of the International Society for Scholarship of Teaching and Learning and president of the Pod Network Professional Society for Faculty Developers. He is currently the co-editor of the International Journal for Academic Development and has been on the advisory board of the National Survey for Student Engagement. He's also a fellow of the John N. Gardner Institute for Excellence in Undergraduate Education that many of you might know about. You may have gone to some of the Gardner Institutes, and it's a foundation that works to advance equity in higher ed. Dr. Felton earned his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin, his baccalaureate degree from Marquette University, and he was apparently the rowing champion at the Tulsa Rowing Club. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Peter Felton.
Thank you, Dr. Short. I think saying a rowing champion might be a bit of a stretch, although I was in a boat that won a national rowing marathon many years ago, which was quite exciting. And one other thing about me, besides the overly generous and kind introduction by Dr. Short, is I spent the first 5 years of my career at Tulsa Community College, first as a faculty member and then as a division chair in liberal arts. So I have never been to Central Carolina Community College, even though we're not that far apart. But I've spent a meaningful amount of my time teaching in a community college, working in a community college, and I really, really deeply appreciate the mission of community colleges and the work you all do every day. So when Christy said some people might have to, or when Erin said, excuse me, some people might have to step away to work with students, that is fabulous. Please do all you can to support your students in every way possible. And I want to echo Dr. Short in one other way too, just to thank Erin for her incredible support through this process. It's pulling off Welcome Week like this is a challenge in good times, and we're not quite in good times, and she has been incredibly helpful and incredibly supportive, and so really wonderful. So thank you so much, Erin. for all you've done to make my visit first in person and then virtual so wonderful to Central Carolina Community College. I'm really happy to be with you here this afternoon. What we're going to do, like Erin said, is something of a workshop, although it's sort of strange to do a workshop in this space, but we're going to do the best we can. What I'm hoping is that we'll have quite a lot of interaction. Some people are already modeling that in the chat, so thank you for doing that. Please use the chat as much as you can. I'd love it if people are engaging with each other in the chat, and I can sometimes just ignore it, and you all have conversations as we go there. There'll also be times when we'll stop sharing the screen so we can look at each other and talk, for everyone who's available to have those kinds of conversations. Where this is going broadly is I'm going to do a little framing, then we're going to have some breakouts right at the beginning in about 10 minutes to get you all talking, because I know a lot of the expertise on learning and relationships in and beyond our classes, probably the vast majority of the expertise that's in this Blackboard Collaborate space isn't in Elon, North Carolina right now. It's at Central Carolina Community College. So I want to be able to draw on the experiences, the good work, the knowledge you already have with what works in your students and in your space. So after those breakouts, I'll present some more, a little bit, some principles and examples, and we'll go into a second round of breakouts toward the end, where you'll have a chance to talk really about your next steps and what you'd like to do in your own work with students on your own, and then in your work collaboratively at the college with students. So that's broadly where we're going. So I hope you leave the afternoon with some practical ideas of things you can do, some maybe new connections to some colleagues or renewed connections to some colleagues who you haven't had a chance to see since December or long before, and maybe a little inspiration about how important the work that you do is for your students and our community. So that's broadly where we're going. As Erin said, as Dr. Short said, what I'm presenting today draws on this book that Leah Lambert and I published with Johns Hopkins University Press. If you're one of the lucky people who wins a copy, I'd be happy if we're ever near each other, if you'd like that. But we published this actually on Election Day 2020. And the research for this book we did before the pandemic hit. We did most of the research in 2019. We interviewed almost 400 students, faculty, and staff at colleges and universities around the US, so a little more than 24 institutions, everywhere from LaGuardia Community College in Queens, New York, to Florida International University in Miami, Cal State Dominguez Hills in LA, and the University of Washington up in Seattle, and a lot of places in between. And what we were doing is building on existing research about how relationships matter in students' college success and college experiences. And then we wanted to illustrate that and elaborate on that and deepen that by having these personal stories from faculty and staff and students at all these different institutions. So through the session today, especially in the middle part, I'll be sharing a number of quotes from the interviews. And Erin, in one of her many things she did to support this, rounded up a few of you, thank you, who are going to be the voices of some of the people we interviewed. I didn't ask those people to be actors or to pretend to be the person, but just to pause and to read a quote from someone, because I think the quotes and the words have real power, and it's important that we spend the time to really listen and hear what students and faculty and staff, often at community colleges, were telling us about how important relationships are in their work and how difficult this work is. So that's where we're going. One thing you might be thinking is like, okay, Peter, you wrote this book, but didn't we already know relationships matter? Like, why do we need a new book on relationships? Well, that's a good question. It's a fair question. I hope I can convince you maybe we do. But I do want to really just very clearly acknowledge that there's been decades of research done on community colleges, universities in the US and around the world that demonstrates that the quality of student faculty, student staff, and student-student interactions, the quality of those interactions are the most significant factor in essentially every good thing that happens in a student's college experience. How motivated they are, whether they feel like they belong and matter, how much they learn, whether they persist and graduate, And actually, there's really interesting research that suggests when college graduates say they had someone in college who inspired them and challenged them and supported them in reaching their dreams, those college graduates are more than twice as likely as their peers, to say that they're thriving professionally and personally 10 years after graduation. So the interactions we have with students matter a lot for their experience in college. And they also have lasting, significant legacies for their lives, professionally and personally, after college. So this work is really important, and these relationships are really important. A couple things I want to underscore about this research that was done by lots of people besides Leo and I. One is that one key here is that it's the quality of relationships, the quality of interactions that are important, not the quantity. So this isn't some sort of social media thing where if you have 1,000 followers, you're more successful than 100 followers. What the research says is have even one or two people who are significant in supporting them and challenging them and encouraging them in their college experience. That's transformational for them, right? It can be great when they have 7, 10 or more. In fact, we did a national poll that found that students who report having 7 to 10 important faculty, staff, and peers in their college experience, those people are much more likely to consider college worth their time and much more likely to report that they're thriving after college. But even one or two are really powerful, right? So that's one thing I wanted you to know about this research. It's quality more than quantity that matters. The second thing, to draw on a synthesis of research by Adriana Kazar and one of her graduate students at the time, is those effects of the quality of interactions are particularly strong for students of color and first-generation college students. In other words, they're particularly strong for community college students when we think about it. And what I mean by particularly strong here is that positive interactions with faculty, with staff, with peers are particularly powerful, particularly helpful for students of color and first-generation college students. And negative interactions or a lack of positive interactions are particularly damaging for first-gen students and students of color. So the stakes are higher in having a relationship-rich college experience for many of your students, right? So just want you to understand the broad frame of what the research in general says about why relationships matter so much for learning and all sorts of positive outcomes in college, that it's about quality and that this matters the most, in fact, for students like many of the students you teach at community college. One other thing, there's newer research coming out that I think is really powerful about how important relationships are in online education. And in this case, it's particularly instructor-student relationships, the data says. This recent article, I love this phrase, that instructor-student relationships are the connective tissue between students' engagement and rigor in online courses, right? So when we're teaching in the way we're teaching right now, for all of us because of disruptions, or when we're teaching online just in whatever ordinary times are, these relationships matter as much, if not more, in online courses as they do in more traditional face-to-face courses. So that's what the research that other people did tells us about the quality of relationships. I want to give you just one slide that sort of synthesizes what we found from our 400 interviews. And after this, I'm going to frame this up a little bit, talk about this a little bit. And then after this, I'm going to ask you to jump into some breakout rooms and talk with each other about these issues. But first, let me give you the synthesis of the book, what we found relationships do that are so important for students across the US. So first, what students need is what it sounds like a lot of you are providing today to your students, which is they need to experience welcome and care. And what they need is what one of the people we interviewed called relentless welcome. So not just welcome on the first day of the term, not just welcome the first time they enroll at Central Carolina Community College, but they need to be welcomed and cared for every day in class. Every time they step foot on campus or every time they log in and connect with one of your courses or one of your services at the college. The good news is a lot of students are reporting this, especially community college students are reporting this as being really a powerful part of being a student during the pandemic, is that faculty and staff are taking the time to express welcome and care in ways that really matter to students, because we know lives are so disrupted right now. But the research suggests, our research and others suggest, that if students have this sense of welcome and care, they're much more likely to be successful, to persist, to learn a lot, to graduate, and to have a positive sense of well-being as students. And when they don't have that sense of welcome and care, when they don't feel like they belong or they matter in college, they're much less likely to be successful in our courses, at our institutions, and in education more broadly. So welcome and care are really foundational to everything else. A second thing we found, again, this is confirmed by other research, but we saw it very clearly in our 400 or so interviews, is that relationships are probably the most powerful way to inspire all students to learn. What students told us over and over, and I'll give you research about this and examples of this, is that they work harder when someone knows their name, when someone has expressed some care about their success. Someone has says, I know you can do this. I know this is hard, but I know you're capable of doing this work. That kind of inspiration, that kind of interaction is incredibly motivating for many students. That can come from faculty and staff. Faculty and staff are key to that. Peer interactions also can be very powerful in inspiring students to learn. In fact, there's research on first-gen students and students of color that suggests peer-to-peer interactions are perhaps the most powerful factor in inspiring first-gen students and students of color to learn. And what that suggests to me is that our classrooms and all our interactions with students, but especially our classrooms, have to be the kind of places where students connect with their peers in educationally purposeful ways, because that will help them learn and succeed. Okay, a third factor. Third principle we found, that what students need to be successful in college is not a single mentor who knows everything about that student's life, has a lifetime connection to them, and can advise them in all parts of their education and life. That's not realistic, and that's actually not what research suggests students need in community colleges or undergraduates at places like Elon. What students really need is a web of significant relationships. They need peers, they need staff, they need faculty who can do different sorts of things for them. Faculty might help them prepare in certain ways professionally, or learn to write more effectively, or learn to read more critically, develop a professional aspiration in some ways. Staff can help in some of those same academic ways, and they can also help in other really powerful ways of navigating job markets, navigating life as a student and as a parent and as an employee in all these other ways. And then peers can be so powerful as inspiration, and also just as friendly faces, right? So what we need to help our students do is connect not just with the professor at the front of the room or leading the Blackboard Collaborate, but with their peers, with staff and faculty colleagues throughout the institution. And then fourth and finally, what students told us over and over in their interviews is that college often feels pretty transactional. It's about getting in, it's about getting through, it's about getting out. And what students really need to have a meaningful, deep college experience, to have the kind of transformational experience that many of them want and we want for them, is they need people who will help them and challenge them to explore big questions in their lives. At LaGuardia Community College, they have two questions they center all their educational work around with students, which are who am I and who am I becoming? And those kind of big questions are really motivational for students. They're really important for students. Students often don't have the opportunity to think about those sorts of things outside of college, so this is a rare opportunity for them to dig deeply into who am I and who am I becoming. And the best way to do that is with trusted peers, with trusted staff, with trusted faculty at the college, right? So these 4 factors, these 4 things are really central to thinking about relationship-rich education. I've been talking for a while now. And as I said at the beginning, I recognize that much of the expertise, much of the knowledge in this collaborate room is actually not on this side of the collaborate room. It's where you are. So what I'd like to do now, and Erin's going to help because Erin helps with everything, is we're going to create some breakout rooms. And what I'd like you to do in the breakout rooms first is introduce yourself if you don't know everybody, or just check in with everybody, see how everybody's doing. And then talk about 2 questions. And we'll push these into the breakout room so you can read them there too. But the first question is, what do you already do to cultivate relationships with your students? What works right now in your work, whether you're a professor, a staff member, a student, any role? What do you do already that works? And then secondly, what are significant barriers to you developing these kinds of relationships, or barriers for your students to developing these kinds of relationships? What do you see in your work that makes this extra hard to do? So Erin's going to create groups, going to have about 12 minutes in the groups, and then we're going to come out and have a bit of discussion about this. So introductions, what do you do already that works, and what makes this hard to do this well at Central Carolina Community College?
Peter,
Ready?
this is Jamie McLeod. I'm sorry, Erin's having some technical difficulty.
Okay.
And could you promote me to a moderator? So
Can you
that I
tell me how to do that?
Yes, so there should be buttons right beside your name under the chat.
Okay.
If you'll click
Okay.
it.
Yep.
And if you see me.
Well, and your name again, because I can't hear it.
Jamie McLeod.
Jamie
You should
McLeod.
see like a menu or some buttons.
There you are. Yeah. And then I click on this, and I'm going to say make moderator.
Yes.
And I just did that. Thank you, Jamie. I
Thank
appreciate
you
the
very
technical support.
Thank you.
Okay, so while Jamie is creating those, thank you, Jamie. I hope everybody has a sense of what we're going to do. Does anybody have any questions or comments while we're getting the groups ready? Anything in the chat or anything out loud?
So the groups are ready. I can start.
Oh, great. Let's go to groups and we can have a conversation when we come back. Okay, so 12 minutes in your groups. Enjoy, everybody. Thank you, Jamie.
I apologize for interrupting you, but I just got a message from Erin and her laptop's giving her some trouble.
I just saw a text from her. No, Jamie, I really, really, really appreciate you jumping in and walking me through that. I've used Collaborate only a couple times, so I could not have done that without your help. So thank you. And can you tell me just, so I set a timer for myself, but will you be able to pull people back from the rooms, and can we push a note to them?
Yep, I can just stop the breakout groups and they'll come right back in.
Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Well, that has never happened before.
There we go. That's why we do things like this, Erin, so that you can have the experience.
Jeez. Oh my God. Get ready to hit start on the buttons and everything's shut down in my.
That's okay. Jamie jumped in. He walked me through how to make Jamie a moderator, and then I could just then the magic happened. So it was
From
fun.
now on, there will always be a backup moderator in these sessions.
Ah. Live and learn.
Aaron, I think John Matthews joined after I did the breakout groups.
That's fine.
Okay.
Dr. Matthews, do you want me to throw you in a breakout group right quick? My laptop said, your device ran into a problem and needs to restart. We're just collecting some error info and then we'll restart it for you. Oh, gee, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. You know, since we're talking about broken things, yesterday we were doing laundry at my home, and you know, we have like a 10-year-old washer, but it has a little touch screen and all this, and it just stopped, and there was an error message, Aaron, and it says the washer is broken. Like, okay, do we get anything else? Nope. It's full of water and clothes, and it's like it's broken. I'm like, I'm not sure we needed the little display to tell us that it was broken, but thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I was like, yeah, I love technology.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. Thankfully, I had my Google chat on my phone, so I immediately started blowing people up like, oh, help, SOS. Oh,
Excellent.
thank you so much, Jamie. I feel like you're always coming to my rescue.
Sure, you're welcome.
It was all those compliments y'all were giving me at the start of the session. My laptop was like, haha, not today.
It overheated. Yeah. It's true, though. I mean, this is not everyone is so helpful and communicative. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. So when they come back, Angela will read that quote.
Well, when they come back, yeah, when they come back, first thing we're going to do is just have a discussion about what people were talking about in the breakouts. And then when we get back to slides, Angela will be first.
All right.
And I'll cue her up. So, you know, I'll describe what's coming and then this line will appear so that if I can remember how to do that. And I do that by going down here and saying share files. And then there, look at me. It's like I'm a Blackboard Collaborate Pro. Okay. And then I just say share now. I'm going to try this. Oh. Yep. Ha. Or I'll just ask Jamie for help, one or the other. One more quick Collaborate question before I forget. When we're in the full person view like this, is there a raise hand function, or how do people indicate that they want to speak?
There is.
There is. Okay. Oh yeah, I see it. Right.
Down at the bottom, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. I'm going to step away for a minute and refill my little water glass.
Peter, I did want to tell you though that Collaborate does not do the countdown when you bring people back from breakout rooms. It just immediately throws them back into the main session. So.
Aaron, I heard you just say about cooperate not doing countdown. Is there a way to push a message into the breakout rooms to say, 2 minutes left or something like that?
Jamie, do you remember if we say something in this chat box for everyone, if they'll still be able to see it while they're in breakout groups? You might have stepped away. I think everybody can see it if we do it in everyone.
And all we need is one person in each room to see it and say, oh no, we only have 2 minutes.
And looks like there's a few people in here with us now. They might have lost connection, and
Sure.
when they reconnect, it doesn't put them back in their breakout rooms.
We've got about 5 more minutes in the room, so either way is
Tanasha,
fine.
Regina, Jessica, if you were in breakout rooms, do you remember which ones you were in? Jamie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Are you going to have to be the one to? Oh no, I see the end breakout button.
Mhm.
I
I
was
think
thinking
you
you had to be the one to bring them.
share a timer, Aaron. I think that's a secondary content.
Okay. Let's see.
Do you see timer under secondary content?
I see poll. No, I just see polling.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Mm-mm.
Jamie, can we just use the chat to tell people that there's about 2 minutes left, or does that not work with breakouts?
Yeah, I'm not 100% on that.
We can try it just in case.
Yep, I'll do it right now.
We did breakouts this morning, and when we brought everybody back, Dr. Chapman was in mid-sentence in her group, so that was a good joke. She accuses me of cutting her off all the time.
I just looked at Blackboard's help site, and they've temporarily disabled the timer. So
Well, thanks, Blackboard. Jamie, we should make some sort of bet on how long it takes Rodney to email me and ask me for this recording, since he wasn't able to be here for this long anticipated session.
I know he'll certainly love it. That's for sure.
I can't remember, Jamie, were you at adjunct night last night?
Yes, I was.
Sorry, my brain is
You
completely
had a few
maxed out.
things going on, yeah.
Anyways, it was so nice to talk to Rodney. I was like, I don't think I realized how much I missed him until I got to talk to him last night.
Yeah.
Were you able to do that in person or was it remote?
That was remote. We had talked about doing it in person and doing a virtual option.
Mhm.
But when we surveyed our adjunct faculty back in October sometime to ask them, it was overwhelmingly a virtual preference. And I get it because so many of our adjuncts have full-time jobs and
Yep.
other commitments, children and stuff. So it's just so much more convenient for them to be able to do it online.
Yeah.
And some of them live too far away to even
Hmm.
join us in person anyway. So
Yeah. Well, and I don't know about you. I live only like 7 minutes from the university here. And
mhm.
the pandemic has made me lazy with that. I'm like, I don't have time to drive 7 minutes and then 7 minutes back. I mean, that's way too much time. So let's just, anyway.
Yeah.
So, and that never would have occurred to me before this. That it's like, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, it's been a couple minutes since I told them 2 minutes. So
All
somebody
right.
brave enough to interrupt?
I'll bring him back. Oh, oh well. Surprise. You're back.
Welcome back, everybody. The good news is you're going to get to have conversations with these people again. The bad news is we just stopped someone in the middle of a brilliant sentence. So I apologize for that. What I'd love to do, if people are willing, is to have a little bit of a larger group conversation right now about what you talked about. And we could use the chat. You could also use audio if you want to turn your camera on. That's great. If you don't, that's all right. You can raise your hand or just start talking. But I'm curious, when you were talking about what do you do already to cultivate educational relationships, what already works in your, what did people say? What were some of the good ideas you heard? Anybody willing to jump in? Okay, so we get some things in chat. Using preferred names, encouraging students to work together. Yeah. Thank you. Videos, asking them about their weekend. You know, Shauna Jones, the comment about asking about your weekends, one of the really interesting things that's emerging in some new research is that simply checking in with students, you know, sort of saying, how are you? How are things going at the beginning of class? Is surprisingly powerful at a time when students don't feel connected to anybody. So a number of students are reporting well, a number of institutions are reporting simply having faculty check in with students. How are you doing? At the beginning of every class is one of the things students are reporting is a powerful thing that happens in online COVID teaching. Okay, lots of ideas now in the chat, learning about them, listening, encouraging discussion, calling them by name, being real and approachable. Yeah. Great. So we have lots and lots of good ideas. One of the things I really like about the good ideas you're sharing is they tend to be pretty sustainable good ideas. These are, you know, these are check-ins. These are Amy Bradbury's idea. Start class with tell me something good. So I really like this, you know, small, simple, powerful, motivational outreach, to use Jennifer Babb's phrase. Okay, so those are all good things. What makes it hard for your students or for you to have this kind of, or to create this kind of relationship-rich environment? What are some of the barriers to doing this well? COVID. Didn't take long for that answer to come in. So things were perfect before COVID, and now it's difficult. I'm teasing, of course. I agree with you, Constance. It was not perfect, but it was easier. before COVID. I also see distance. Is anybody willing to unmute and talk about barriers, or would you prefer to stay in the chat? Christy Holmes raised her hand. So please, Christy, go ahead.
We talk a lot about just time in general,
Yeah.
Having enough time, because we know that connecting with students personally, really individualizing our care with students is one of the best ways to get to know them and for them to get to know us. And of course, you know, there are more students than there are of us, and just having that time. So making sure that the time we do spend with them is very meaningful is important.
Yeah. Thank you, Christy. Yeah, time is perhaps the biggest barrier on both sides, faculty and students. So thank you. And I really want to just reinforce what you said at the end too, which is, so making sure the time we do spend with students is being used really powerfully. Okay, Willie Nixon III. You want to jump in? Oops. Okay, so Willie, I'm guessing there's some technical problems somewhere. I think someone else has raised their hand, maybe Jennifer Babb. Jennifer, could you?
Can you hear me
Oh, here
now?
you are. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, I'm sorry. What I was saying is, in the classes that I teach, I try desperately to help the students to understand that they are not going to fail, that I'm not there to fail them. Because the students have this idea sometimes that they're not going to make it through the class. So in the first day or so, I try to get them to relax and understand that this is not this is not failure, but that we are going to be success. And the other thing is that we are here learning together. I'm going to learn from you and you from me.
Thank you. That is so important. Leo and I did interviews, like I said, with a couple hundred students, especially community college students around the country in 2019. And Willie, what you're describing is probably the single most important thing students said they needed to hear from faculty, which is that you're capable. I know you're capable, even if you're not showing it right now. I have faith in your capacity to do the hard work that it's going to take to be successful in this course and at this college. So thank you for sharing that. Jennifer.
One of the things that we talked about as far as barriers is just not having sometimes the manpower. You know, I know some advisors have a bigger caseload of advisees, just like success coaches have these huge caseloads and so forth in different classrooms. So just sometimes feeling like, as Dr. Holmes said, with not having the time, not always feeling like you have the manpower to address and support each student's individual needs.
Yeah, I think that's really important. One of the things I'm going to encourage you to think about is how to do things that aren't always one-on-one. One-on-one is really powerful, so I'm not trying to minimize the power of one-on-one, but as Christy, I think it was the first person to speak, said, there's a lot more of them than there are of us. It's simply not scalable if everything we do to support students has to be one-on-one all the time. That's one reason why I think it's so powerful to think about our classes as communities where students are connecting with their peers and maybe with other people in ways that can be helpful and supportive and challenging to them. And then how do we think of our work more broadly outside of the classroom and students in ways that does use our time one-on-one in the powerful ways it can, but that also takes advantage of the fact that sometimes we can communicate with lots of students or connect with lots of students at once. Great. There's a lot in the chat too. So I appreciate that. So thank you for sharing all that. What I want to do now, if it's all right, unless anybody has any questions or concerns you want to raise right now, is I want to share a little bit from our research, including some of the stories that people told us about being a student, being a staff member, being a faculty member, and building relationships, and then share some practices that we heard that I think do help us think about how to do this work in scalable ways, in ways that don't get around the time barriers and don't get over the fact that there's lots more students than there are faculty and staff, but that acknowledge, well, that make it possible for us to do some things really effectively. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once with collaborate, and I'm not super skilled in collaborate. Okay, so that's where we're going to go right now. I welcome comments, questions. Just raise your hand, put things in chat. You know, if you have comments or questions for me. And again, I'm really happy if you want to be chatting throughout this, talking with each other about examples or ideas or challenges you face. But now we're going to be sharing some of the, I'm going to be sharing some of the research that I've did in some of the interviews, some of the quotes from the interviews that I did. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Erin got some volunteers among colleagues. Angela Chris Sears is going to be the first one of these, who's going to read the words of some of the people Leo and I interviewed for our research. And the first quote, the one Angela's going to read, it's going to be on the screen in just a minute, is from David Latimer, who is an academic advisor at City Tech in the City University of New York. And I want to tell you a tiny bit about David so you understand his context. Maybe it'll sound resonant to your work or not. When we interviewed David, he described himself as a fourth generation college student or college graduate. And he'd spent most of his career working in the Harlem Children's Zone in New York, working with low income, mostly students of color, helping them succeed in K-12 education and go into higher education. And what David said is after doing that for 20 or 25 years, he got frustrated seeing so many students be successful K-12 and then go off to college and come back unsuccessful. So he decided to shift his focus and he started working with the City University of New York. And he's an academic advisor. He has a really high caseload. So he literally has talked to thousands and thousands of students at City Tech, which is a technical-oriented community college as part of the City University of New York. And this is what David told us when we asked him about barriers for students to succeed. So, Angela, here's the quote.
Students fear failure and being challenged beyond their limits. They may not have been challenged academically in high school, and for the first time are really experiencing academic rigor. They fear embarrassing their families, being afraid to come home and say, I'm not achieving in college right now, I'm struggling. They fear talking to a professor because the professor represents an intimidating authority figure. They also resist asking for academic help because that is perceived as meaning you're not smart. They do not want to go to counseling when they have emotional problems because that's for people who are weak. The fear of shame is everywhere.
Thank you, Angela. And I want to be super clear here that what David Latimer is not saying is our students are weak or flawed or damaged in some ways, they're snowflakes, nothing like that. What he's saying is they feel like they're carrying quite a big burden for themselves, for their family when they go to college, especially when they're first in their family to go to college. They feel like they're on their own in this, that their success is something they have to earn individually. And it's a sign of weakness. It's a sign that I'm not ready. It's a sign that I'm not a good student if I have to ask for help, or if I go to the writing center, or if I need to talk to my advisor. We're doing some more interviews for a follow-up to this book, and I interviewed a student at San Antonio College in Texas this past summer, and he told me this story that just broke my heart. He did quite well in high school, went to San Antonio College, a local community college coming out of high school. He thought he knew what he wanted to do. And he needed an associate's degree to do it. And so after his first semester, he decided what he had planned wasn't right. It wasn't what he wanted to do. And so he dropped out. And he worked for a few years and he got a clearer sense of what he was doing. And he wanted to go back to the college. But he was embarrassed to go back to the college because he was going to see the academic advisor he had worked with who'd helped him so much in that one semester. And he felt like he had disappointed her. And he told the story, and he said it was really hard for him to go back to the college. But when he walked into the registration office, he bumped into that advisor. And he said it was amazing because she was so excited to see him, which is not what he expected. He felt ashamed at having dropped out. in the past and now coming back. And he said it was transformational for him that she greeted him so warmly and said, "You can do this." So that's David's point here, is that many of our students are feeling isolated, feeling like they have to do this on their own, and they don't see that they're surrounded at the college by faculty and staff and peers who want to help them succeed, as Professor Nixon said, right? They don't see that often enough. So that's one of the things we need to recognize, why this can be so hard for students. A second thing that can make this difficult, and this came up in the chat, but to preview the next quote, and Candace Solis is going to read this one. We interviewed some students and faculty and staff at Southern New Hampshire University, which is the giant 180,000 student online institution. And well, I'll leave it to Candace to read a quote from Erin, who was a writing coach at Southern New Hampshire University. This is how she describes students there.
One of the biggest hurdles our students have to overcome is the feeling of being adrift in online classes where they don't get to see each other face to face, and when they can't go up to their instructor or to a friend in class to say, "I'm really struggling with this," or "I'm excited I've learned that."
Thanks so much, Candace. And this, we saw this in the chat already, how COVID and distance can make education even harder. It makes all of us feel less connected to each other and makes all of us feel a little bit more alone. And so just recognizing how that can be a barrier for students is really powerful. It's really important. And I'm really pleased to see that folks are thinking about that already. I also resonate with what Amy Gustafson put in the chat about students, even when we see them face to face now, they're all wearing masks, and in her case, scrubs and hairs up and masks. So it's hard to see who's who. I'm teaching right now at Elon. We have a winter term, and we're meeting face to face. But I'm having a hard time recognizing it was day three today. Hard time distinguishing a few of my students from each other because they look the same physically, above their mask and below their mask. So it can be really challenging to have those sort of small interactions that can be so powerful. I'm struggling. I'm excited. It's good to see you. All those things matter a lot. One other barrier that I want to highlight that's really, really important, it's not going to be a surprise to you teaching in a community college, is that students who face discrimination and inequities outside of the classroom and outside of our institution also carry some of these with them inside the classroom. So Thea Boyer is going to read a quote from a student named Khadijah Shea, reflecting on her experience as a junior at Bryn Mawr College, which is a selective private liberal arts college for women outside of Philadelphia.
Coming to college was a difficult experience for me. There was the just being away from my home part, and then there was race. I never felt like I was a student first. I was always Black first and then a student. For example, during my junior year, I remember walking into class on the day after Tamir Rice was killed by police. I was distraught. I walked into class and sat there, and it seemed like no one else was fazed by it. The day went on as usual for other students. It was just so surreal to have all this weight on me because of something that happened and not feeling that reflected at all by the students and professors around me.
Thank you for reading that. A couple things about Khadijah that I want you to know that she described to us in the interview. Like Tamir Rice, she's from Cleveland. So that wasn't a random thing, that was home. And Khadijah's actually the oldest child in a family, and she has a younger brother who is the same age as Tamir Rice. So they didn't live in the same neighborhood, they didn't know each other, none of that. But when that tragedy happened, it wasn't just a random thing for her. It was a lot. It was very heavy. It was her family, it was her brother. And it reinforced the sense that she's separate from other people at Bryn Mawr. And what she said is she didn't expect any professor, any staff member, any of her peers to sit down with her and say, okay, Khadijah, let's resolve racism in the US today, right now. Let's just work this out. She said, I didn't expect that. I didn't want that. I wanted someone to sit down and say, how are you? You doing okay? And just to listen for a little bit. And so really the power of her words, I hope, is recognizing what a lot of people have said already, said in the chat, the importance of students feeling seen and recognized as people, as whole people in our classes and at our college is so important. In fact, there's a wonderful book by Rebecca Cox about community college students. And one of the points she makes after this large study of community college students is that sometimes we think so much about why students are failing. And perhaps it might be more helpful to think about how amazing it is so many of our students who face so many barriers are persisting and continuing. And so how do we help students? How do we help ourselves see that resilience that they bring with them to college, that the cultural capital, the social capital, the other kinds of capital they bring with them to college that help them be successful? How do we help them recognize that and support them in that? Because many of our students face really extraordinary barriers and are doing very impressive work just to be with us day in and day out at the college. Right? So what do we do about this? What's the lesson from this? What's the research suggest? Jamie McLeod not only is a wizard at creating breakout rooms, but Jamie's going to read a quote from Matt Smith at Cal State Dominguez Hills. If you don't know Cal State Dominguez Hills, it's a four-year university in South Central Los Angeles. It's almost all students of color, almost all low-income students. And Matt says it's one of the most diverse institutions, higher ed institutions in the United States. And he said what they've learned teaching, working with students at Dominguez Hills and from the research is really, really clear. And this is what Matt says.
Once your students recognize that you care about them and about where they come from and about their goals and what they're trying to accomplish, then you have a strong foundation for teaching and learning.
Thanks, Jamie. And just to be clear, Matt actually is Dean of Students at Dominguez Hills. So when he's talking about teaching and learning, he's not only talking about what happens in the classroom. He's talking about all the work that happens at an institution that helps students learn and grow. And what Matt is really talking about is what a scholar, Laura Rendon, who's her career's been based in San Antonio, calls validation theory. And Rendon's written about validation theory for about 3 decades now, based especially on studies with Latino and Latina students in the American Southwest, in community colleges and comprehensive state universities. And what validation theory is, I want to be really clear, isn't what some people might think about with the old self-esteem thing. You know, everybody gets a gold star just for showing up. What validation theory says is that students need to be recognized as whole people, that we care about them, who they are, what their goals are, what they're trying to accomplish. And if they are validated in that way, lots of things are enabled. In fact, Rendon and a colleague wrote a synthesis of the research on validation theory about 10 years ago. And what they found, there's a quote from the article that I'm not going to read to you, but you can see that the sense of validation, the sense that someone at the college sees me and cares about me as a whole human and thinks I'm capable of being successful, that leads students to have the kind of mindset that leads them to feel like they can succeed. This is exactly what Professor Nixon was talking about earlier, that they have a capacity to learn, that they become excited about learning, they feel connected, and they are cared about. So validation is really powerful, the sense that someone believes in my capacity to learn is key. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of what this validation can look like in our work with students. One comes from a scholar at the University of Southern California, Darnell Cole, who did a very large study of male students of color in college and how they receive feedback on their academic work. And what Cole's research shows is the way I was taught to give feedback when I was a graduate student and learning to teach at a community college isn't helpful for these students. I was taught what was called a feedback sandwich at the time. So you say something positive, then you offer some critique, then you end with something positive. So, in one of my US history courses, I'd have students write, 2-page essays on a particular topic. And a feedback sandwich kind of feedback would be, Peter, you did a good job of writing 2 pages on this topic. Next time, perhaps you could have a thesis statement and some evidence and paragraphs, but keep writing 2-page essays, right? What Cole's research shows is that kind of feedback is alienating for male students of color. They interpret that as the professor lowering their expectations because the student is Black. And what Cole's research shows is that there's a different way of giving feedback that actually is supportive and challenging for male students of color. And I'd suggest it's really powerful for all our students. And Cole's framework for feedback that validates is you should have 4 parts. Start by communicating high standards and expectations, and follow that with belief in the student's capacity to meet those standards, even if their work doesn't do so now. Then you provide specific guidance and availability of resources, right? So that student in my history course who wrote a 2-page long essay that wasn't very helpful, my feedback to them would start with saying, as we've talked about in class, as this class requires a lot of reading, writing, and thinking. And I know you can do this. I've seen you do it in class. I've heard you make really strong arguments in our discussions in class. But this essay here is not showing me that right now. Remember that assignment we did on writing a thesis statement? I encourage you to go back to that and think about how to write an effective thesis statement. I know you know how to do this because you did it in class on that thesis statement exercise day, right? Maybe some more feedback, and then end with, you can come to my office hours. There's a writing center. There's ways that can help you do this. I know you're capable of doing this kind of work. I can't wait to see your next essay, right? So that kind of feedback that we can give in classes, we can give in other places too, in advising sessions and other things, that pairs belief in student capacity with specific guidance. That's validating feedback. That's really powerful. I'm going to give you another example of a way to validate students that can be really powerful. This comes from, and Shauna Jones is going to read this quote. This comes from a student named Joshua Rodriguez. I interviewed him when he was at Oakton Community College, which is in suburban Chicago. A tiny bit about Joshua. He is born and raised in Chicago. He's first in his family to attend college. He's always wanted to be a nuclear engineer. He did well in high school. He actually got a scholarship to go to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Went there for 1 semester, did well in his classes, but didn't feel like he fit in. And he said, and I don't know if he was joking or not, fortunately, his girlfriend back home got pregnant that semester. So he dropped out of the University of Illinois, went back home to Chicago, started working, got married, raised a family. But, as his kids were getting a little older, he started thinking, I still want to be a nuclear engineer, and I want to show my kids that we can do this school thing. So Josh went back to college, and actually his first day of college was at Oakton Community College, the local community college. His first day of class was his 30th birthday, he said. And he did something that I never would have done. His first class when he went back was Calculus 2. And he did that because he'd aced Calculus 2 at Illinois. He still wants to be an engineer. He knew he needed Calculus 2. He thought he could do this, right? So Shauna's going to read you Josh's story. It's a 2-part story.
Early in Calculus 2, we started getting into really difficult things, and I suddenly began having these feelings like I didn't belong in this class. that my education, what I was trying to achieve, wasn't possible, and my goals were just obscenely farther away than I thought they were.
Okay, pause for a second, Shauna. We got a second slide coming in a minute, but I just want everyone to sit with this for a minute, because what Joshua is not saying is, I think, what I would have said, which is, well, early in Calculus 2, I thought math was hard, right? He wasn't thinking that. He was thinking, I don't belong in this class. My education, what I'm trying to achieve, maybe it's not possible. My goals are obscenely further away than I thought they are. That's very, very different than math is hard, right? But this is what happened for Joshua. Shauna?
I went to Professor Arco to say that I might have to drop out. He told me, Joshua, I don't want you to do the homework tonight. I want you to look up imposter syndrome and read about it. Then come and talk to me. I did that, and I learned that it is extraordinarily common among students. That interaction bolstered my confidence. I realized that I'm not alone in this, that everyone has these feelings. I went from contemplating dropping out to getting tutoring help and then getting an A in the course.
Thank you, Shauna. To finish this story just in a couple ways, Joshua in May is going to graduate from Purdue University in nuclear engineering. And he would say that Professor Arco is the reason he's going to graduate. Professor Arco was an adjunct who taught one semester at Oakton Community College, right? What Professor Arco did for Joshua is really powerful. What scholars, there's a scholar named Brad Johnson, who we cite in our book a few times, brilliant scholar who studies mentoring in the military and in professions and in higher education. And Brad Johnson has a phrase for what Professor Arco did. It's a really lovely phrase. He calls Professor Arco a mentor of the moment. Right? So this is a different way of thinking about mentoring. It's not somebody who has a long-term relationship with Joshua, who knows Joshua really well, who's there for him for years and years and years. That's not the case. Joshua said afterwards, when he was getting ready to graduate from Oakton, he tried to look up Professor Arco to say thank you. And he couldn't find him, right? He wasn't there anymore. Couldn't find him anywhere. But what he'd done was really pivotal, because he saw Joshua in a moment and recognized what the problem was, what the challenge was, which wasn't math is hard. It wasn't maybe you need to balance your time better or something like that. It was that Joshua felt like an imposter in college. And so that kind of mentoring moment can be so helpful and so powerful for students. So I want you to think, in other words, about how do you validate your students? How do you help them feel like they're being seen as whole humans and recognized as being capable, even if they're not showing it right now? Because as Joshua said, he wasn't showing it when he went to Professor Arco. He was really struggling. Okay, so that's some abstract stuff. I want to give you three specific examples, actually 4 specific examples of practices that we encountered in our research that are really lovely and that might be scalable in helping you work with students. The first one is, someone said this in chat a long time ago. It's so powerful. It's use students' names. Now, the really fun and interesting part of this and inspiring part of this research for me, the research that's cited here, and Erin, who does everything and knows everything, has the slides and can share them, and I've got the citations at the end. This article is open, you can read it. It's available for free on the web. But this is a study from Arizona State University, very large introductory biology courses, hundreds and hundreds of students. And the question is, in that kind of context, does it matter at all if the professor knows the students' names? And what they found is really interesting, and there's a key word on the slide that I hope you notice. It's when students perceive an instructor knows their names, lots of good things follow. Perceive is the key thing. What you need is not to actually know every student's name, but you need every student to think you care to know their name. And if they think you care to know their name, they're going to feel more valued, more motivated, like they belong. They're going to be more comfortable asking for help. The research here suggests they do more homework and they do slightly better on exams. Not transformationally better, but slightly. But think about this. All it takes is for students to perceive that you care to know their name. At Arizona State, in these really large classes, what they found was really powerful for this was faculty having students create name tents, just little pieces of paper that had their name on it that they would bring and use in class every day. Low cost, simple. And what the professor said is sometimes they couldn't read the student's name, but they could say, I can't read your name. What's your name, right? And sometimes they could just use their name. And so it wasn't faculty spending hours and hours memorizing hundreds of students' names. It was name tents that had this really powerful effect, leading students to feel more valued, motivated, and comfortable asking for help. There's one other side benefit that is in this study that I love, and Lisa is going to read a quote from a student in this study.
I didn't understand why the instructors asked us to use name tents. At first, I thought it was pointless. No one really cares what your name is. Now I see that knowing someone's name will help you talk to them. Calling people by name is better than, hey, want to study later?
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so there was a really powerful, unexpected positive effect from these name tents, which is that peers started calling each other by name. Right. So here's a small, super scalable thing we can do, which is use names and encourage students to call each other by name. That's one example. The second example comes from Oakton Community College, which you've heard from Joshua Rodriguez's story already. The faculty at Oakton, there was a lot of, Oakton's like a lot of community colleges, there were lots of students struggling to persist and to succeed there. Faculty got together and said, what can we do in our teaching? Because the college is doing a number of things, but that's not what we're doing in our teaching. What can we do in our courses to support persistence? And so they created something that they tend to call the Persistence Project, but formally it's the Faculty Project on Student Persistence at Oakton Community College. And they've studied it now. The Persistence Project, what they do here leads to significant semester to semester and year-to-year persistence gains in the neighborhood of 10%. In courses that have the Persistence Project. And the biggest effect are for male students of color, where you're getting in the range of 25% from this one intervention. What faculty in the Persistence Project do is commit in one of their sections, because probably like at Central Carolina, community college faculty teach a lot of sections. And so Oakton faculty say, we'd love to do this with all our students, but we can't. So we do it with at least one section. During the first 3 weeks of the semester in that section, learn and use students' names, articulate high standards paired with support, return an assignment with success-oriented feedback, formative feedback, not just a grade. And then the key part of this is meet one-on-one with each student for 5 to 10 minutes, just to get to know them and have them to get to know you a little bit. Now, as Oakton's been studying this, the hardest part of this by far is the fourth step, meet one-on-one with each student. Oakton classes typically are about 30, 35 students. So that's a lot of faculty time in the first 3 weeks, even with one section. So they've tried a number of things. They tried what happens if you spread those required one-on-one meetings out over the semester? The effect goes away. What happens if you have students meet one-on-one with someone at the college for 10 minutes in the first 3 weeks of the term? The effect goes away. The power in this is those one-on-one meetings with students. That's why they tend to do this just in one section at a time. They try to do it in courses that have a lot of students who are new to Oakton, but it's really challenging to do this well. But again, the effects are really positive for students. About 10% gain for all students, about 25% semester to semester persistence gain for male students of color. Candace is going to read a quote from one of the faculty who helped create the Persistence Project, Holly Graff. She taught humanities at Oakton. She just retired. But she said there was this really side benefit that faculty weren't expecting from the Persistence Project that was really powerful. So Candace, here's Holly's words.
I've been teaching here a long time, and I still am in contact with some of my students from 20 years ago. But when I added the one-on-one conferences, it transformed me and my students. I am not just getting to know the students with whom I might have the greatest affinities. Instead, I am getting to know all of my students. And there's a big difference between those two things.
Thanks, Candace. Yeah, in the book, we tell a story Holly told us about one of these required meetings where a student came in and he seemed really angry about being there. And she asked him, like, you know, what's going on? And he said, look, I'm just out of the Marines. You're a philosophy professor. I know you hate me and everything I stand for. I don't know why I have to be here. I just want to get through your class and get a degree. And Holly said they started talking, and he ended up spending almost half an hour in her class or in her office that day, because it turned out that when he was posted in Iraq, he read some of the books, some of the articles that they were going to be reading in her class that semester. So she said he walked out of my office that day with an honors contract for the class. And she said, and if he hadn't been required to come, he came on the last day they were required to come, he would have never come, and I would have never heard his voice once in that class. So she said, there's something powerful, again, in getting to know all your students, not just the ones with the close affinities. So that's a second example. That's a little higher end than just learning students' names, but it's very powerful. The research is strong. A third example, this is another simple example, is thinking about something like note-taking pairs. And you can do this in online courses. You can do this in asynchronous online courses too. You can do it face-to-face courses. You can do it in clinical courses in lots of different ways. But periodically pause a class and ask students to get in small groups and compare notes with a couple of their peers. Ask them to talk about, you know, what's the content of the notes, what's the format of the notes, what are they confused about, how do they take the notes the way they do, and then you can ask for some volunteers to show and discuss the merits of different note-taking approaches. And there's a couple of benefits that research shows about this. One is, first of all, many students don't know how to effectively take notes in our courses, or they might know how to take notes in a history course, okay, but then they get into a nursing course and they don't know how to do that, right? Or they're used to doing it in a lecture course, but now they're in a clinical setting. I don't know how to take notes in that kind of setting, right? So first of all, it just raises this issue. I should be taking notes. Maybe there's ways to do it. Secondly, students often have never looked at anyone else's notes ever in their education. So they only know the way they have done this, right? So looking at some other people, it's like, oh, you organize them differently. Oh, you don't just transcribe. Oh, you use colors or you star, you underline or whatever, right? And so it's a really good way to help students think differently about how to process the information, the content, the skills they're learning in your class. And then the third thing the research says about this technique, which is wonderful, and it's sort of obvious, but it's so powerful, is students start to know each other. And you know, if you have a group of 4 or 5 students and they're looking at notes and they all realize Erin takes really good notes. If a student has to miss class, they don't text or email or grab Peter and say, hey, can I see your notes? Because they know Peter has lousy notes. They go to Erin and say, hey, Erin, could you help me understand? You know, could you share your notes? Could you help me understand your notes? So you're building peer-to-peer connections so that student doesn't have to come to the faculty member and say, could you please review everything that we did in class last time when I wasn't able to be there? So those peer-to-peer connections come too. So this is an easy, low stakes way to get peers working together in class. One more fourth example, and I love this one so much. It just barely shows up in the book because we couldn't work it in enough. It's from this brilliant professor, Amanda Williamson, who teaches psychology at the University of Nebraska. She teaches intro to psychology, right? That's her sort of go-to thing. And for years, she has taught 350-person sections of intro to psych in person, right? 350 students at a time. And she was very, very successful with that. She loved that. Then her dean came to her and said, her chair came to her and said, we need you to teach an online version of this course. This was before the pandemic. So she started teaching a 700 student asynchronous intro to psych course for University of Nebraska students. And Amanda put in a huge amount of work to do this. And one of the things she said is, in her 350-person class, students would be talking to each other every class session in structured ways about the work. And she was trying to figure out how to do that in an asynchronous, fully online course. And so she did some really clever things. One thing she did is she created an online study lounge, she calls it, in the course space. And that's not a space. She says she shows it off to students in a video right at the beginning of class the first day, and says this is a space for students to engage with other students, to get together. If you have questions, if you want to ask somebody something, you want to just check in with somebody else, you want to find somebody, there might be people in the study lounge. Go there and do that, right? The second thing she does, though, is Manda creates reasons why students will use the study lounge. And my favorite one of these reasons, right? So she encourages students on assignments to go find people to give feedback in the study lounge and whatnot. But my favorite thing she does, she says one of the key things she teaches about in Intro to Psych is efficacy, things like self-efficacy. So the ability to set goals and work towards those goals. And so she uses the course as a place for students to practice self-efficacy. So one of the things she does is she has students set goals for themselves about how they're going to perform on each exam. There's typically 4 or 5 exams in this course. And she polls the class and asks the students to set a goal for the average exam score for all 700 students in this class. Right? So it's a common goal, right, that students set about 2 weeks before the exam. And then she encourages them to use the study lounge to meet that shared goal. And so she showed me what the study lounge looks like leading up to an exam. And there's a whole bunch of things happening in there. There are students setting up, synchronous breakout rooms to study together because the class is largely asynchronous. But students will say, I'm going to be here at 9 o'clock on Thursday night. Could you do that? Anybody wants to join me? There are students who are posting memes, you can do it memes and all this. There's students posting homemade study guides. There's students posting YouTube clips of videos they found really useful. Manda says she looks at that, and if something's going awry, she'll try to clear it up. But it's all student generated content, and it gets really rich and active in that online study lounge. And then after she's graded the exam, she gives students their individual grades and she posts to the whole class what the exam average was. And it's fun, it's hilarious to look at the study lounge after the class average is announced, because there's either a celebration of, all these memes of joy of we did it, whatever, or there's people saying, okay, next time we can do this. So the students are working together to succeed in the course with Manda's encouragement and a little bit of structure, but not much else. So thinking about ways that we can create, again, encouragement spaces, structures to support students, to help each other succeed, I think is really key. And Angela Crisp-Sears put something in the chat that I think is really key too, and I appreciate you saying this in the chat, that there's peer tutors, supplemental instruction that can be so important in student success. When you read our book, it is full of stories of peer tutors and supplemental instructors. Not only do they act as sort of force multipliers for us because there's lots more supplemental instructors often or peer tutors than there are faculty, but there's really a lot of power in near peers, someone who looks like me or someone who is in this position not that long ago, helping me learn. One of the things that a lot of institutions have found, I don't know if you do this at Central Carolina, is some of the most effective peer tutors and supplemental instructors for students are people who have struggled and then succeeded. So it's not always the students who just aced every exam. It's the students who could say, after the first exam, someone comes to a peer tutor and says, I did terribly on this exam. I got a C. I'm really disappointed. I'm thinking I have to drop out. The peer tutor's like, you got a C. I got a D. Let's talk. You can do this, right? The other thing that I just want to so much underscore, and we saw this the most powerfully was at LaGuardia Community College, which is full of students who are immigrants to the US, mostly first gens college students, immigrants, and the power of peer tutors, not just helping students, but being role models. So one of the students we interviewed said, when I went into my first peer tutoring session and my tutor was wearing a hijab like I was, and I got to know her, and I found out she wanted to go to medical school like I do, that was so powerful for me. And it wasn't just the peer tutoring, it was that role modeling aspect. So Angela, thanks for bringing this up, because I think all of us in our teaching should think about how do we encourage all of our students to use supplemental instruction, peer tutoring, because too often I think students think that's for students who are bad, that's for students who are struggling. And it's like, no, that's for successful students, right? Okay, so I've given you some examples. Angela brought in another example. What I want to encourage you to do now is we're going to go back into breakout rooms. And I'd love you to take 12 minutes, that's the magic time for breakout rooms today, and talk with each other, try to share the time, but thinking about really concrete things about this, the upcoming term. What are you going to do? What could you do with your students to build stronger relationships between you and your students? What can you do among your students? What can you do to build stronger peer-to-peer relationships? And that could be peer-to-peer in the class. It could be peer-to-peer tutor, peer-to-supplemental instructor. And then finally, what could you do to work with colleagues? So you're not doing this on your own, but all of us, for example, are working with supplemental instructors, encouraging these sorts of things, or trying to practice like the Persistence Project. Okay, so we're going to have 12 minutes in breakouts. We're going to come back, have a bit of discussion, and a little bit of wrap up. So, Erin, Jamie, can someone make the magic happen with breakouts?
Yes.
Thank you.
And Peter?
Yeah.
Sorry, my assistant just brought me my water.
Hello, I'm Peter.
Can you say hello?
Hello.
Can you
How
tell
are
me
you?
what your name is? What's your name?
Anna Kate.
Anna Kate. I have a daughter named Kate. She's not
Ooh.
named
And I
Anna
have
Kate.
a Kate in my class.
Do you? But you're Anna Kate. And
Yeah.
are you 6?
5.
5. So you're in kindergarten?
Mhm.
Yeah, how is it?
Good.
Pretty fun? Good? Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, it's nice to meet you, Anna Kate.
Nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you too.
All right, downstairs.
Tell me where it is.
I'll tell you in just a minute.
Oh, take your time. Anna Kate's more important than I am.
Well, I lied to you. They didn't.
About my army one.
That's in the dryer. The dryer that we dry clothes in. I stand corrected. They did not go back to the same breakout rooms.
That's totally okay. That's okay.
So,
They get to meet new people now.
yeah.
So that's great. Okay. So are there any big themes, big issues you want me to make sure to bring up in the closing part of this? Again, we'll do some debriefing of what do people hear and what kinds of questions do they have. But anything you really want?
Honestly, this whole session has been amazing so far.
It's going to collapse and burn at the end. So it's going to.
Well, you complimented me and made my computer crash. So I was about to say, stop saying that I'm wonderful before my computer crashes again.
Okay.
No, you've already touched on, so I'll tell you that the session that we did, the main session that we did at Adjunct Night last night, which they are repeating for our full-time employees tomorrow, Demet Meakin and Dr. Laura Long did it. It was based on a book. Hey, Kim, let me put you in a breakout session right quick. Were you already in one? We'll see. It's based on the book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. They did a presentation on it. And so it touched on building relationships in the 4 different phases of psychological safety and how we can encourage those different stages in our classrooms. But most of the examples given were examples that really could only be done in seated classes. So we've had a couple people reach out saying, these were great, but we really need, so many of our classes have an online aspect or are completely online. So we really need to know how we can duplicate these efforts in online courses, especially online asynchronous courses. So I know you've already touched on that a lot today, and that would be one thing I would say is whatever we can replicate from seated to online courses is what we really need to include.
Yeah, it's so hard.
It is.
It is so hard. And in a weird way, I mean, I love Amanda Williamson's example from Nebraska, but she has an advantage with 700 students because the study lounge gets totally active and really wild. And it's maybe a third of her students, right? And so if you're teaching 33 students and 10 students being active doesn't look like nearly so much.
Right.
But
something else that just dawned on me while you were talking, even though I mean, I've been hearing it for years about the importance of knowing names. My husband, he's in law enforcement and is the furthest thing you can get from an educator. He actually will tell you that he failed out of college so many times and then picked BLET because it seemed easy and interesting. But he has always, and I think it might have come from his working in the restaurant industry in college, but he always makes it a point to know, especially our waiter or waitresses' names when we go out to eat. But really, even when he's dealing with victims or criminals or whatever it is, he makes a point to always ask someone what their name is or ask it again if he didn't hear it or didn't remember it, so that he doesn't have to just say, hey.
Yeah.
And at first, I kind of laughed it off when we first started dating, and I don't know why it just dawned on me today. I think it was one of the quotes that was read.
No, I mean, and we heard this in our interviews all the time that students would say, if I'm anonymous in the class, it's sort of on me how well I do. But if the professor knows who I am, I don't want to disappoint them. Right? And it doesn't take very much to convince somebody. And I would suspect in law enforcement, just, first a victim feeling seen is important. But if you're perhaps not the victim, still, it's like, oh, dude, like, he knows who I am. Right?
Yeah. But also, I think it goes both ways. Not just he knows who I am, but okay, I matter to him. Maybe that could be the one bit of hope they need to make better choices moving forward.
No, actually, I'm doing a new project with and because your computer crashed, I'll tell you the story. So I'm working with a student here and a faculty member from somewhere else on this project about this concept of mattering, which comes out of psychology, and especially health behavior psychology. Like suicidal ideation is especially in young people, is very closely tied to the sense that you don't matter. I don't matter, right? That it doesn't matter if I'm here, nobody cares about me, nobody, et cetera, right? And so we're doing, based on a lot of interviews, these interviews and some others, looking at mattering with students, and not about suicidal ideation, but just the sense that if students feel like they matter to someone in the class, everything is better. right?
Mhm.
And it's knowing their name. It's someone saying, "Hey, Aaron, I'm glad you're here today," or all that kind of the check-ins that people were saying online. Anyways, why I got into this little story is because Heidi, this undergraduate student who's amazing, we're going to do our first presentation of this research, and we're actually presenting it in a conference in Australia, except it was on Zoom. And so she's somewhat nervous, as you would be presenting for the first time at a conference in Australia on Zoom. And 2 minutes before the presentation starts, the fire alarm in her dorm goes off.
Oh no.
And she ran outside and she like sat under a tree where she had decent Wi-Fi and she did the presentation. I was like, and she was great. She said actually she wasn't nervous anymore because it was so sort of ridiculous and she was so worried about like finding a tree with Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we have these little crises.
Yeah. I chatted Dr. Short, our
Mhm.
VP, my VP. I was like, oh my God, my computer just crashed. This has never happened. And she said, do you want to come grab mine? And I was like, I'm at home. I can't come grab yours. And I had planned to be on campus this week, but I've got some sort of crud sinus infection that
I know. Yeah.
already had COVID a few months ago, but I got tested just in case, since supposedly the Omicron can get through anything. But it's not that. I said, but I don't want to spread these germs, whatever they are. So,
Mhm.
and I had a backup laptop, but I dropped it off at campus to give it back to IT this week.
That's the way the world works, right? So,
So
yeah. Well, it was no problem, and Jamie was brilliant and swooped right in, and so it was no problem at all.
Glad to help.
In fact,
Thank
in any time I'm ever online again and anything goes wrong, I'm just going to be like, Jamie, Jamie.
And then, Peter, you might remember in my conversation, I think the last time there were breakouts, I was like, Jamie, were you at adjunct night? And then it dawned on me a few minutes ago that he presented at adjunct night last night. He so nicely was like, yes, I was there. Instead of like, yeah, Aaron, I presented. Hello.
Yeah. But it was on Zoom or on Collaborate. That's different than not as bad as, no, I sat next to you at that dinner. Oh.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, do you get a break after today or no? The semester starts when? Monday?
Monday. This is actually my first semester in 7 years not teaching.
Okay.
I took a break. I'm trying to finish my project management certificate, and just between that and we've got our exchange student living with us, and both of our younger kids are in activities for the first time. So I was like, something has to go for at least a few months.
And you're a big time basketball fan now too. That's another duty.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, who do you cheer for?
Well, right now just my exchange student.
Okay.
Well, actually, my 8-year-old has her first basketball game this Saturday. So.
Yeah.
I love like 8-year-old basketball more than almost anything else because I don't know how it will be, but when my kids were in it, it was completely random when the ball would go in or not go in. And it was just so much fun because it's total chaos. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one game, the other team scored one basket and it was a kid who threw the ball over her head, like this, and scored. Like the whole rest of the game, they scored 0. But their one basket was that, and I'm like, this is exactly my kind of sporting. I think it's so wonderful. Okay. Well, it has been 12 minutes.
All right, I'll pull
So whenever you're mean,
it really should be on one.
Surprise, welcome back. Sorry to not give you any or much warning. What I'd love to do now is similar to what we did last time we came back from breakouts, which is I'm curious what you talked about, what were good ideas, inspiring things your colleagues or you are going to do. Is anybody willing to share those? And also, are there questions or concerns or challenges you have coming out of that discussion and thinking about what you're going to do with your students tomorrow, next week, this semester? So anybody willing to put anything in chat or to raise their hand? Thea, create short video responses to emails. John Laverne raised hand, so please.
Yeah, we kind of all agreed that the 10-minute meeting was a really good thing to do, and the challenge, of course, is especially with a larger class that's asynchronous, is getting the time to meet with everybody for 10 minutes. The other thing we do, we have advisors and we have success coaches. And in my experience, the success coaches typically brought into the mix, or brought into the discussion with the student when there's a problem or issue, and thought for the future that maybe that needs to be a more proactive relationship and much tighter tied in on a regular basis.
Yeah, John, I think that is a brilliant idea. A number of the places we visited for our research that I was so inspired by, bring in success coaches, in the first week of class, or bring in peer tutors in the first week of class, if only to introduce them and say, hey, here's the peer tutors. Here's some of the peer tutors for this class. These are the people here who can support you and help you, right? And so what we want to do partly is what folks call normalizing help-seeking behaviors. Right. So how do we help our students see that you should go to the success coaches right away? One other thing, just a quick thought, John, one of the benefits I've seen with actually having lots of things on Zoom is it's easier to do lots of 10-minute meetings or 5 to 10-minute meetings on Zoom than it is in person, because students don't have to spend the time getting to my office, et cetera. You could pop right in and pop right out. So it can be challenging to do what they do at Oakton. That's why they only do it with one section, but it's powerful.
Yeah, our meetings with students, or at least in my experience with our meetings with students, is that they're typically, Zoom or Collaborate meetings as opposed to in person.
Yeah. Yeah. So, maybe that makes it a little easier to set them up back to back, and it makes it easier for students to pop in from wherever they are.
Yeah,
Any other? Yeah.
It makes it easier.
Well, it's still not easy. Because there's still the scale issue. There's a lot of them and not so many of us. Great. Other questions, comments? Okay, well, there's some great ideas in the chat. What I want to do is, I've just got a couple things I want to close with, and then I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes and chat if people want to chat informally. But let me just get to the right slide. And then, so we were here, right? Okay. So I'm going to close with 3 quotes from interviews that we did. All of them come from community college settings. And I think they have complementary, different, powerful things to suggest. Jamie's going to read the first one, but I want to set that one up. The person speaking in this quote is Donna Lindemann, who's one of the people who created a program in the City or University of New York called ASAP, which is an accelerated studies and associates program. And ASAP has been studied really extensively because it's so successful. ASAP students complete associate's degrees at 3 times the rate of their peers in the City University of New York. And what ASAP is it's somewhat cohorted. So there's some learning communities in courses, and there's a lot of wraparound support for these students. But to be an ASAP, you need to be low income, first generation community college student. in City University of New York. And Donna Lindeman's one of the creators of this program. And she said, there's all these supports and all these cool things like peer tutors and supplemental instruction and success coaches and advisors. But fundamentally, there's one thing. And this is how Donna describes that one thing.
Many of our students haven't necessarily tapped into the gifts and the skills they already have, their own tenacity, their own intelligence. We help them understand that they are fully capable, every single one of them, of earning their degrees. We ask, what are the things that you've worked towards and achieved? That is essential to them being able to say and believe, I am good at things, I can commit to things, and I can finish them.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, again, it's about helping students see the capacities they have and how those capacities can help them succeed. That's the heart of this work. That's why relationships are so powerful. Now, the second quote I want to share with you in closing is a student at LaGuardia Community College in New York City. And when we interviewed Taylor, the student, Lisa's going to read this one, but when we interviewed Taylor, this was her second try at college. She was in her mid-20s. She'd tried college once, failed out, wasn't sure she was going to be successful. And she was required to take an introductory writing course when she went back to LaGuardia, went back to college next time, this intro writing course at LaGuardia. And this is, she said, was the pivotal moment in that class for her.
Near the end of...
Yeah, excuse me. Let me just say this. Sorry, Lisa, I forgot I cut off part of the quote. So she says that her writing professor said this about halfway through the semester to the whole class. Sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
Near the end of the semester, one of my best students is going to stop coming to class because they feel overwhelmed with all the pressure, and they are really scared that they're going to do poorly. I want to assure that student to keep coming to class, even if you missed an assignment or feel like you don't do well on an essay, because it's going to be okay. Come see me. Don't just disappear.
Thanks, Lisa. So Taylor said when her professor said that, she was sure he was talking to her. And she was thinking about dropping out. She did go see that professor. Professor actually got her going to the writing center at LaGuardia and getting peer tutoring in writing. And Taylor ended up doing well in the writing class. And she did so well, she ended up being a peer tutor in the writing center. And one part of the story that I love is Taylor says, as a peer tutor in the writing center, she said, every semester I see multiple students from this professor's class. And they say, you know, he said this thing halfway through the course about someone's going to drop out and they're scared they're doing poorly. And that's why I'm here, because he said that. And so Taylor thought that was funny. I think it's a really beautiful illustration of how powerful it can be when we say the sorts of things we sometimes say to individual students, when we say them to our whole class. Right? Because what was powerful for Taylor wasn't this professor doing a one-on-one with her. It was the professor recognizing that struggle in front of all of the students. Okay, so that's a second thought. The final thought from a community college student we interviewed is from Tiana Guerra at Oakton Community College. And Tiana put it really simply. It only takes meeting that one person who ignites a fire within you. And she's right. That's what the research says. That's what can happen in our courses. It can happen in our work at the college. And I want to really encourage you to think about, how do you make the work you do with students a place where they're going to meet that one person who ignites a fire within them, recognizing that that one person doesn't have to be you, because as I think it was Christy said right at the beginning, scale is an issue. There are so many students and so few of us, right? But we can make our classes, we can make our programs, we can make our work with students a place where they do feel recognized and they matter and they're connected, and they can find those people who are going to inspire them. And it's probably going to be a peer who's going to be that person. So I just want to thank you for being here. Erin had something she wanted to do. I can hang around for a few minutes if people have questions and want to talk, but thank you very much. Here's all the citations if you want to see some of the stuff that I've mentioned and you want to read some more, but thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was amazing. I couldn't have asked for a better closing to Welcome Week. I know that I've taken away a lot of tips to use in all of my interactions with students. So thank you. I know that we're almost out of time. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we are giving away 5 copies of his book, Relationship Rich Education. So I am going to share my screen right quick to do this fun little spin the wheel to pick our winners. Give me 1 second. Let's see here. All right, Julie. And everyone that wins today, I will put these in interoffice mail to you. That'll be next week. So congratulations, Julie. All right, let's do this again. Denise Martin. Woohoo! Congratulations, Denise. Alright, let's see, I think we've got 2 more. Michelle. Woohoo! Congratulations, Michelle. Last one. I think we rigged this somehow for all the health sciences areas to win these. Congratulations. I will send all of you your copies next week. Let me stop sharing. All right, congrats to all of our winners. As Dr. Felton said, we can hang out for a few more minutes if anybody has questions for him. Robert says, does health science mind sharing with the rest of us? Maybe we can set up some sort of book club for this. Thank you all for being here. And just a reminder, we do have one more session tomorrow morning that was rescheduled from earlier in the week. So hope that many of you will join us for that as well. I'm going to stop recording right